people do not get a lucky break. A lot of us, we see from the outside, oh, somebody rose to fame. Could, pick a name, could be anybody. But what isn't usually talked about is all of the work that went in before that one moment. That one moment may have been life-changing, but that moment would have never happened without all of the work that came prior.
Hello, fellow beings. Welcome to Tapasya Loading, a safe space to attempt honest, raw, and authentic conversation in homage to the ancient act of stoking a sacred fire. This episode is brought to you by the Holistic Musician Academy, your home for 360-degree music mentorship, music, self-care, and artist development. Okay, we're officially live on a bunch of places now. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks so much, TL. Thanks for having me.
That looks like some legit coffee, though.
This is good, and it's actually, I've got some branded merch here.
Oh,
it's blurry.
It is blurry,
but it's got my business name on it, Pianist Academy.
You seem like the kind of person who'd be a coffee head, though. Are you?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. See. Oh yeah, I remember now. I'm actually reading it on your bio. In fact, I just remember.
There's even a line on my bio. That's how much of a coffee nerd I am.
Oh yes, all with you, man.
So how late in the day do you drink coffee?
Oh, I've been trying to behave myself of late, so I try to drink my last flat white before 8 p.m.
Oh, that's behaving. Yeah.
That's my good behavior. It has to be horrible. Some of those Southern European habits I picked up. I had an Italian roommate for about 4 years, and Italians will drink coffee at like 11 p.m. after dinner and stuff.
Oh yeah, I used to go to dinner with friends pretty regularly and get a double shot of doppio after dinner. Exactly. And it would be like 9 p.m., 10 p.m.
Exactly. That's the kind of college life I grew up around. But you know how growing older works. Certain changes need to be made, and at some point,
unfortunately, yeah,
you find your body dealing with coffee slightly differently than the way it used to.
Oh, yes.
A couple of decades back. I just made ourselves sound like 90, which we are not, just to clarify. Right. I often start off these conversations with what I call the memory lane phase of the whole thing, which is wherein I recollect my first impression of the guest, and some of whom I've met in person, some of whom I haven't. In your case, it's one of those, I don't know if it's a first-timer, but it's definitely one of those rare cases where we haven't actually met 3D, but we've been hanging out hanging pretty hard for a while now.
Pretty regularly.
Yeah. And you're my coach. You're my coach.
Officially, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, officially. I say that. I also say that proudly because I'm always banging on about to my colleagues, peers, and students, collaborators about how, hey, listen, I practice what I preach. I get coached myself regularly as well. So I'm happy to go on the record about on how that's helped. In fact, we met at one of the most toughest periods of my life. Like I literally met you a week after my dad died. I remember it was the first mastermind session of the year this year. I just joined, still in like the prep phase, still getting a hang for what we do there. Mm-hmm. And I remember just like walking into the room, like online, and just being in the day. So like, hey, good to be here. Just FYI. Oh, my dad just died last week, so I'm not really sure how coherent I am, but I did want to be here. And I mentioned this not to make light of things per se, but also to kind of also, I guess, to make a point about how so-called online relationships are not the shallow kind of thing it's often made out to be. Absolutely.
I mean, even whether it's like we're talking on Zoom right now, for example, and that's, I mean, it feels almost like being in person together, I think. Mm-hmm. But even I do live streams pretty regularly, and even there, you get to know people by their screen name, of course, not always, unless they're willing to share their actual name. But you get to know people, you get to know their personalities. It's really cool.
It is
to get to know people and interact all over the world. It's great.
There's the location independence. There's the time independence, for lack of a better term, which I'm not sure is particularly relevant to what we're talking about. But I think there's also a certain sense of safety about being in your own space, but still being able to engage with anyone else in the world, which gives us a different kind of freedom at a very subconscious level, which I've learned to acknowledge for what it's worth. My mentor, Kenny Werner, is also someone I've never met in person because we met during the pandemic. I'd grown up on his books for since my late 20s. And we had have a very deep relationship too. And he would keep banging on too about how, he's into the whole metaphysical Hindu lifestyle as well. So he's like really big time into outer body experiences and stuff, how the spirit is way bigger anyways.
Yeah.
But, some of the most important relationships in the past few years I've built really are behind the screen. Now, last night I was at a concert where I was reminded of the power of space, though. One of my friends who was on the podcast last week, actually, Kaval, he has this amazing performance set up. It's almost like an art installation where he plays guitar, heavily processed, but in a very artsy way. And each string on his guitar is connected to a separate speaker. So 6 speakers, each speaker playing one string, and the audience sits in the middle. And this was inside a church, so you can imagine the impact. It was it was like 2 hours of divinity, really.
That's very cool. Yeah.
It was a refreshing reminder of how being in a certain space together also is the kind of thing which really do with learning to value. But I digress. Get used to my ramble, by the way. This is what I do here. There's going to be lots of rambling.
That sounds good.
Okay. You say that now, but give it another hour. The first time we met, that coaching session, one of the things I noticed is this was supposed to be a 90-minute call. And it ended up being about
3.5 to 4 hours. Yeah.
And it was a testament to the kind of passion in teaching or coaching, which I heard a lot about, talked a lot about, and haven't seen a lot of people practice, because it wasn't like I'm going to don my teacher's hat here. It was a very organic extension of who you are as an artist, and it was very apparent as well.
Oh, I appreciate that.
The kind of energy you bring to the room as well is incredibly inspiring. It just really did push me to take things next level. That's my very, very tangential and random way into getting into how I just am really glad to have met someone who transitions between being an artist, or doesn't even transition, or just embodies this role of educating artists in the way you do.
Yeah.
That's my way of asking your first question.
Okay.
Was this a conscious decision, or is it the kind of thing that just happened along the way?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's always been, always is a little bit of a strong word, but probably since I was about 18 years old, I've had a sense that there has to be a deeper plan for what's going to happen with music, life, business, how it's all going to work together. And I guess the very first instance of that was, so I was starting my bachelor's degree in piano performance. And I was literally 18, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do to use this to make money.
Familiar story.
So I'm going to start a recording studio. And I did that my very first year, my freshman year of college, as we would say in the States. And it was all on location, so in the concert halls, recording like other students that had recitals that needed to be recorded, or needed audition tapes, or all kinds of stuff like that. And I just started networking with people, and all the way from back then, that's been a part of the way I think about everything. There has to be some like deeper plan of how things are going to connect. So starting that studio was the very first thing. And now I have this huge knowledge base about, tech-based stuff, audio, even video, tech-based stuff. And it made it even possible for me to start a couple other businesses where the tech needs are very apparent. And it would have been so much more costly to do that if I had to hire a team of people just, from day one, just to get things going and get the ball rolling. So a lot goes back to that very first decision.
How do I make money?
I took out a little bit of loan money and bought some gear to get going. And it was just basic stuff, but I learned on the job, really.
Tell me more about learning on the job.
So at least when I started, a lot of the recordings I was making were classical piano, That was where most of the people I hung out with. Go into the concert hall with my gear. I would have no idea where am I supposed to put microphones? Where am I supposed to set up? How is this supposed to run? What is professional and what is not? I had never even been in a recording session.
Wow.
myself.
So these were on location or like live
These
recordings?
were on location, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I talk about diving into the deep end.
Yeah. Fingers crossed that the computer didn't die, or that, there wasn't going to be a problem. The first jobs I did, I still have the copies of the recordings I made. They don't sound all that awesome. I had the benefit of working in like really beautiful spaces with beautiful instruments, and that was very nice. But I looked at every project as an opportunity to learn something else. So every time is, how can I make it sound more professional? How can I be more professional for my friend or the client that I'm working with? What takes this to the next level? And it was only about a year of doing that or so. Occasionally we'd be working in a really beautiful space, and other times it would be like a gymnasium. Where the fluorescent lights, make this awful sound, and we're trying to run around figuring out how can we bring in like floor lamps to stand around, and can we turn the lights off, and can you run back to the studio and grab these baffles because like that corner sounds really bad.
With bath towels?
Baffles, like acoustic baffles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said run to the and grab some bath towels, because I've actually done that too. Use towels too.
Yeah, whatever works in the situation like that.
Indeed,
whatever works. And so for a long time, I would sit kind of in front of the console with just sheets and sheets and sheets of paper, and I would slate the take numbers, and then I would have the score in front of me if there was one for what the musicians were playing, and I would take notes about what was good in the performance and what wasn't good. That makes it a lot easier to sift through when you have 6 hours of recorded content from a day in the studio. If you don't have to listen to, takes, 5 through 20 because everybody was kind of getting their stuff together, then you can skip that 30 minutes. That's a big time saver later on.
Indeed. The whole fix it in the mix thing. It's like how many records have not seen the light of the day because of that approach.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a specialist in recording classical music specifically?
More so than other genres. Yeah. I have done other work, especially mixing. I've never had a studio built out to the point where I could really track jazz or rock, pop, stuff like that. But I've done some editing and mixing projects in those genres. But probably 95% or more of everything I've worked on has been classical.
That's amazing, man.
Some kind.
I'm totally going to exploit this situation to pick your brain on this. I was actually talking to Chris yesterday, by the way. Shout out to Chris if he's listening. I was like, I really need to watch out that I don't end up using this as some scam to get like a free coaching session out of Charles here. Yeah. But I'm bordering on that at the moment.
No.
What would you say are the biggest differences between recording piano for classical music as opposed to pop or jazz? I have a few ideas, but I want to hear from the horse's mouth.
I mean, the most obvious is just the technical side of it, where you're going to put mics, how you're going to mix it. That's going to be very different. And the kind of space you need to be in really to do the two things, ideally, is to be in one of the largest spaces you can find. That's always more optimal. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it's really cost prohibitive to do something like that. A lot of times if I was doing a classical recording, it would be for a professor that had access to a space like that. Right. Usually like for free or for a very nominal amount of money, like $50, $100 to get an entire afternoon, multi-million-dollar space. Yep. Whereas if you have to rent that, so if we're talking like a major label, or if this is a release that's expected to be very popular on a global scale, there's going to be more funding either from the label or from some kind of corporate side, or the artist themselves is going to know that they need to put in those kinds of funds. Yeah. So that's one difference in classical. The other is we'll call it post-production. Let's say just in editing. In classical music, we're sticking to the score. And of course, there's room for interpretation and there's room for the performer's personality to come out. But we're still, almost all of the time when we edit a classical recording, we have photocopies or digital copies of the score. And we're marking in, this beat for this particular note, we're going to take this edit. And that edit might last 16 bars, 32 bars, something like that. And then the exact point we're going to take from the next is marked to the pitch on paper.
Wow.
And if the performer is really, you can actually make that happen on the pitch, because you need to have the track played in the space the right way so that the left and right side of the edits match, which I'm sure like you have experience with that kind of stuff.
Yes. But
yeah,
I do, but not on the kind of scale you're referring to here. Also, there are no metronomes, no clicks, nothing.
There's no click. So the internal metronome of the performer has to be spot on.
Wow.
Or it can't be off by, more than like a beat per minute, really, from one pass through the phrase to another one. If you're going to edit right in the middle like that. The other thing that is usually the thing that messes with people is that you're not, in classical recording, you're not just capturing the instrument, but you're really recording the whole space.
Oh.
And that's different than if you're in a really, really dry studio and it's really like all you hear is the instrument you're tracking. So, for example, in classical recording, you can never take the first note played. You can usually never take the first measure played, but it all depends on how live the hall is.
Wait, hang on. We get the musicians to play for a while first, like warm the room up?
You always have to plan, to have, I like to tell people we need to be able to start at least 4 measures before the point that you know that you need to redo. We need to get into it. And then the playing in has to match on the left side, because the room needs to be ringing the same way on the left side of the edit as it is on the right side.
Incredible.
So you can't just go in and say, even though we talk like what I just said is, it's a very precise and we'll have it marked out that way. The previous, like say, measure of music has to be almost exactly performed the same way in both takes.
Amazing. Man, you just opened up a rabbit hole for me to dive right into, because I can't let you go without diving a little deeper into this. Just out of it, I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
The people you went to college with, the classical musicians, how many of them had any producing chops?
None that I can think of.
I know, right? This is something it's interesting. I know for a fact that in the US, the college structures, conservatory structures, are slightly different. They've always been slightly more progressive. Europe's has always been a little conservative in a lot of ways. At the time I went to college, there were always these very harsh and strict divides between the people who studied jazz and the ones who studied classical music. And then there were the weirdos who actually studied popular music. And I was a little out of the latter two categories. And I remember most of the classical folks would always be so nasty to us, except when they needed a recording stand.
Yep. It's too bad that, I experienced the same thing.
Really?
That it was very rare when I was in school for the two, like people studying classical, people studying jazz. The circles just did not mix.
Yeah, what is up with that? Because I see so much.
I know. There was one person that I knew who studied both, and he'd be in the classical hallway, and he would change from practicing Beethoven, and all of a sudden he'd be practicing like jazz licks.
Oh,
that was really cool. And I used to go and chat with him and say like, how do you do that? Because how do you do that?
How do you do? Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for jazz players because it's almost like a totally different language than what typical classical player will speak.
Thank you. Right back at you. I have an enormous degree of respect for classical musicians, to a point of intimidation almost, because I'm the worst reader as far as piano playing chops are concerned. I just about managed to pass my sight reading exam in college. I'm so glad how you refer to time management, and I'm not referring to calendars here, but like internal metronomes. There's so much mythology amongst jazz and popular musicians about classical musicians not having quote unquote time, which is so not true. It's just it's such a completely different approach to time and rhythm, which
I would agree with that.
A lot of pop musicians and jazz musicians actually don't really get, like feeling that kind of a pulse.
While I'm not a jazz player, I've done a lot of pop studio work. And so I feel like I can speak to a little bit of both sides in that, like, I do know how to play to a click track or to a drummer.
I'm sure.
And still find a groove. Like, so it's not robotic. It still has feeling. But like you said, it's that different sense of how time works. Exactly. And, but when I play classical repertoire, it's totally different. And that's because I'm in control of the pulse and it's coming from inside. I'm not working with other people. usually in those, I mean, even in a collaborative sense, I feel like there can be a lot of give and take in classical music.
100%.
And especially the pop music I've done, things are it's kind of in a box. We have to like make this beautiful sound, but it has to be in this very defined way. And I think there are challenges in doing both of those things.
100%. Pop musicians, like progressive pop musicians, you know, and I did like a liberal arts music kind of a thing. And part of the whole agenda in that course was we're going to throw a bunch of people from extremely different musical backgrounds on purpose because we want you to get into a room and do stuff together. And, you know, it'll be because every one of you is going to challenge each other's mindsets. Your fundamental approaches to music are going to be challenged. And that's exactly what we want you to do. So figure it out. So all of a sudden I was in a room with a classical cellist who never played to a metronome, a rapper who had never played an instrument before and had just rapped all his life. Yeah. And me, I was the nerdy jazz keyboards dude, who everyone hated, by the way. and then there were these, and then a heavy metal guitar player. And I'm not even exaggerating. It was.
That sounds like an interesting sound.
It was intense, and this was just one of the combinations. We had this lab phase for the first semester where everyone had to kind of play with each other and just kind of deal with their guts. And it was actually back, especially for the time. This was what 2007, 2008. It was very progressive, like what they were trying to be a proponent of at the time. This was in Mannheim, but truth be told, it also cost me a lot of time because it ended up being a bit of a detour to figure out what my artistic persona was. Sometimes, you know, there's always that what if rabbit hole. Okay, maybe if I just focused more on what I think I'm about, maybe it would have been a quicker journey. But it definitely taught me the kind of things I wouldn't have if I just stuck to my conventional jazz fusion circle. So speaking of time, though, because I know you told me that you worked on pop productions as well. What is your approach to actually working on your inner metronome? I've never actually heard a classical musician talk about this.
Oh, gosh. I don't know if that's going to be tough to put into words, but I'll give it a shot.
I can imagine.
I think I could maybe sum it up by saying that, so first of all, for example, if we're talking about a certain number of beats per minute, I want to be able to, and I teach my students to do this too, we want to be 80, 90, turn the metronome off, play, talk about something else, blah, blah, blah. 2 minutes, 3 minutes goes by. Can you, at the end of 3 minutes and being distracted, can we recreate that pulse?
I love that you use the word pulse.
Can we still find exactly what that speed is? Can we use memory to reference back to that? Or have we developed enough of an inner sense of what 90 beats per minute feels like that we can go straight back to it? And whether it's clap it, tap it, play to it, I think that's one of the most basic ways of talking about it. Because if I think about if I'm playing a piece of music and I want to phrase things and I want to take rubato and I want to shift the music around, and sometimes I do a lot of that, but I always have to keep in mind the pulse where I started the phrase or the pulse that led us to this point. And so no matter what detour I take, I have to arrive back there. It has to be so built in that really that if I'm performing, I don't have to think about it consciously. I just know in my inner ear that when I'm finished with this phrase, I'm going to be back at the same beats per minute that I was before. And things will, ebb and flow around that. There might only be a few notes where I arrive back there, and then we go off in another direction. We go faster, we go a little slower. But everything revolves around pulse. Like you said, I try to use that word a lot instead of beat, because I try to tell people like it relates to our physical pulse, our heartbeat.
100%.
And if we also emotionally too. So, if we feel music in certain ways, if we are playing something that's very calm and relaxing and down tempo, well, guess what? Our heartbeat, our actual pulse is also going to be slower.
Oh, so true. So true.
And if we're playing something more exciting or it's more aggressive or we add any emotion in, the range that our actual pulse, when we experience those emotions, it's all going to be different. And if we can relate what we're playing to some of those physical sensations, I think we can end up giving a much more convincing performance, especially in classical music where we're really most of the time playing someone else's notes. Trying to figure out what was the composer actually trying to say?
To own it, to make it your own.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, being a composer, I don't write notes down because they made me feel something in particular. And if I teach a piece that I wrote, I can tell people, well, this is what I was feeling when I wrote it. Can we find something similar that you've experienced? Or can we find a way to tie these two things together so that you can relate to my personal experience? We can't ask those questions of a lot of the great classical composers, but I still think it's a journey that we should try to take. And a lot of that can provide a lot of insight that's not on paper.
So glad you mentioned that. I can confirm some of what you said, by the way. One of my earliest musical educations was apprenticing for a veteran Latin percussionist. And believe it or not, like the first few months we spent with him, he teaches stuff like how to count a song in. And he'd say, it's not about tempo. I want you to count the song in, and I want you to convey the emotion of the song when you count it in. Even if it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, the tempo might be the same, but every song has its own like DNA, and you can't just superimpose just random generic tempos onto a song. That is not how it works. You have to look at each song, each composition as its own being, and make sure that when you're in charge of counting it in, it's a big responsibility. You're literally dictating the first step of how that song is about to pursue. You mess it up, it's going to be one of those things that's very difficult to cover off for a download. That's like trying to fix it in the mix.
Yeah. The first note, even if we're playing someone else's tune, the first note is like our birthing of the piece.
Oh, yeah. So,
and with what you really intended, it doesn't really matter anymore because the whole rest of the direction is going to be based around how it begins.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it wasn't his theory either. He was channeling some stuff there himself. But I remember that's one of the first things we were taught to do. Learn to count a song in before you even want to try and play it. You're not going to be able to play the song if you're not feeling the pulse.
That reminds me of a quick, very side tangent.
Go for it.
There was this very popular metronome back when I was in college, and a lot of the string players would use them. I think it was called a Dr. Beat.
I think I remember
and it was this
something
big, it was just it looked like a brick, and one of my friends would put it on this voice that would count out all the numbers, except it was like this very aggressive, like yell at you voice.
Oh, hello, whiplash.
and you could hear it through the practice room walls. You could hear the metronome counting out loud. Wow. And it was like 1, 2, 3, 4. It was like a drill sergeant counting. And especially after what you just said, I couldn't help but think of like how that makes you feel when you're listening to this counting that has, I would say that's even worse than listening to a beep or a click that like doesn't have any humanity at all. Yeah. That's bad enough.
Doesn't pretend to be human.
Right. But having a voice that you can hear the emotion in it, and then you try to play like some lyrical line over that.
Oh, yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen at all. You refer to how the physical aspect to rhythm and music generally. There's research supporting this. Like literally, our chemical composition, varies depending on the kind of music we're listening to. And then to kind of hear a drill sergeant count something out and go into, I don't know, a ballad or something, that's just complete cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
That's just an extra hour with my therapist, honestly. I have a free gift for you, my friend. No strings attached, legit free gift. What if you could have your entire career as an independent musician presented to you on one page? All of the aspects you needed to be aware of, starting from creativity to collaboration, stuff most musicians are a little less privy to, like PR, other aspects of music business, down to self-care, and a very lucid display of how all of these elements are interlinked. What if you could have one page which gave you an overview on all of that? I can give you that page, and it's up for a completely free download. Please go check the episode notes. You'll find a link there. One page, an entire overview of an independent musician's career. And in case you're wondering why I'm doing this, I want to build an ecosystem of holistic, happy musicians and artists who are building their careers in a fulfilling manner on their own terms. So if this is something that resonates with you, go to artistmindmap.com. Right. So much for all my questions about entrepreneurship and business. I mean, I feel like I could go on another hour just about this, but I do want to find a few some connective tissue to the rest of your what do you do, because it's a very unique profile. Okay, before I go ahead, for my listeners who are listening or eventually will listen, Charles is not just a badass musician and producer and teacher. He's also one of the guys who's owned his music career. He's a business owner and he's built it on his own terms. He's defined success on his own term, not on the conventional path. You know, it's the kind of path. I mean, it's kind of there are more and more people going that route. People getting privy to other options and to building your own career. But at the time, you folks, even young men, I know, for context, who's a founder of Elite Music. The elite musician group where we met. At the time, there weren't not as many people even trying it out or having faith in it. So you have figured out this way. You connect all of these different aspects, you know, entrepreneurship, location independent entrepreneurship. Not all entrepreneurship is even the same. You know, there are nuances specific to the type of entrepreneurship you're aiming at too.
Right.
And you've managed to kind of forge all of this into one cohesive artistic persona, which is very inspiring. It's the kind of thing a lot of us are aspiring to do. I am anyways. Where did this journey start? Like, where would you say the seed of this entire thing started? Is it something you were aware of even in the earliest years when you even started playing piano? Or was it the classic, I'm out of college, what the hell do I do with my life now? Or a little bit of both?
I think, I might even say that I'm blessed to have I've never lived a moment in my life where I wasn't sure what I was going to do with music.
Amazing.
The brief time that I talked about at the beginning today, where I thought in my first year of college, like, am I ever going to have a chance to perform? Yes. So that was a moment of questioning, which led to a decision to do something, you know, alongside the knowledge I was building while I was training in my undergrad. If I just kind of walk through my journey,
absolutely,
I'll do a little bit of that because that might help to frame some of the answer. So I did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in classical piano performance. I did them back to back. I didn't take a break between. I felt like I wanted to go straight through each program. I stayed with the same main teacher through both of those. And in the meantime, I had a few others that I would study with. Very soon after I finished my master's degree, I started working a church job. And I think a lot of classical musicians go that route. I think one of two things usually happens. Most classical musicians with a degree end up teaching right away out of college. I was doing that a little bit while I was in school. Or they get a job at a church, especially keyboard players. There's just a big demand for that. And it's, you know, even if the church doesn't have a keyboard, you can bring one. We can, you know, the piano, the keyboard, the organ, if it's a big cathedral, can lead worship services with just one person. And so that's a direction that a lot of, I'll call them pianists, but really a lot of keyboard players, can go that direction. So I did that for a long time. It actually was 10 years to the month. I worked for one church. I was the music director of a program. And I think some of that probably plays into my desire to kind of always wanting to do a little bit more, not for me, but to serve people, to serve the people that I'm around. So when I started the job there, for example, there were like a few singers, a few cantors that would sing on the weekend. That was it. So I showed up as the pianist. I would work with them. And that was the entirety of the music program. Within like 4 months of starting, I started a choral program because a couple people approached me, and I thought, well, okay, if there's 4 or 5 people that actually took the time to come talk to me, there might be quite a few others who just, maybe they didn't find the time, or they thought, maybe it's not worth it because it won't happen, but they probably also want the same thing. So I started a program that initially began with about 8 singers, and at the peak, before COVID, at the peak of it, we had over 30 in that choral program. And so that grew from a really tiny group into like a decent chamber choir. And that was great. Alongside that, I started a praise band. And sometimes I'd play bass guitar instead of keyboard. I'd have one of our, like, the guys that would sub for me when I wasn't around or something. We'd have him.
You play bass too?
Yeah. We'd have him come in and he'd play
awesome.
keys.
Okay.
And I'd play bass, and I'd just switch over to something else because we didn't have anybody that did. So I filled in on another instrument just to fill out the sound. And we did all different music. And alongside that, I started a children's choir.
Amazing.
Because we have all these kids involved, or that we wanted to get more involved, and they had nothing musical to do. So now we've given them something to go to once a week in the evenings if they're into it. And it doesn't have to be like super serious. We could have some fun, and they can also learn, like, I tried to teach some good vocal technique in the process. But it was really about, in each of these circumstances, it was really about giving different groups of people something to do to get involved. And secondly, how to enrich the experience for everyone else that was in the community. And we raised money for music education in a school in downtown Phoenix that was extremely poorly funded. All of the dots connect because that was bringing the community something really cool that didn't exist there before. People would have had to drive 30 or 45 minutes to go to some of the same types of events that we were hosting. So even though those kinds of opportunities were relatively close, we brought them right to the people's doorstep. And so people were very supportive of that. But in doing that, we also provided opportunities for kids that would have never gotten access to music education.
I remember reading up on that.
Ticket sales and sponsorships for the series funded year after year after year of educational opportunities for those kids.
So good.
And I'm really passionate about this. It's the last piece of the puzzle. And this can lead into maybe some other business discussion. But a lot of times when musicians gig, they're not always paid very well.
Indeed. Tell me more.
And it was very important to us that every artist that came out was paid what I thought was a very fair rate to perform. And most of the time, those started at like $1,000 a show or more. And these are for people that didn't have to travel. They just drove their car, from one part of town to another part of town and showed up, played the gig. All of those things are really important. We can't ask great artists to come and just give their life's work for free. We can't ask that all the time, maybe once in a while for something. But it wasn't at all how I wanted to be and how I wanted the series to be known as like, oh, when Charles calls you, well, it's a great thing and you should do it, but you're going to lose money on it. I wanted it to be a win for everybody involved, the community, the artist, and the kids that were going to get funding from our ticket sales. So, brilliant. Yeah, that was all 3 of those things it was a really fun time to organize that series.
Permission to respond with a question.
Absolutely.
Brace yourself. It's 2 questions in one. Why do you think musicians keep getting paid badly? And what is it about musicians and money? Why are we so uncomfortable talking about money?
I'll answer the second one first.
Okay.
I think I've experienced a lot of people as artists feel embarrassed to ask for money or embarrassed to be paid. This feeling that we have to give music. I don't know if it's because it's an intangible thing, but it's some people that I talk to, I get the sense that they feel like it's their duty to give art away to others. And I think there's some beauty in that, for sure. And especially if people don't have an opportunity to experience art otherwise. Great. I think there can be a time and a place for that, or at least to make it very accessible for people. Because a world without art is, I think, a very boring and would really be kind of an awful place to live.
100%. Hard relate.
To the point where those people can't pay their bills. Literally, they can't
Yeah.
They can't pay rent. They can't, maintain their instrument. They can't even go out and buy a digital keyboard sometimes. There's not enough money to do that. And I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, it is indeed.
Because in order to keep providing art for people and for the world and for our communities, we have to be compensated for that.
Yes.
If it's all we do with our time, how else are we supposed to keep living? How can we keep doing that and then keep having to give and give and give and give? If you ask any other tradesperson to come and do something for free, they'll say, you're out of your mind. Like, no, I won't even get in the car. I won't even continue the conversation with you.
This conversation didn't even happen.
Right. And people wouldn't even think of their time and their expertise. So I don't exactly know what it is about music, because even if we look back throughout history, musicians were always compensated. A lot of the musicians that were employed by the church, for example, they may not have been paid necessarily, but they were given housing, they were given food, they were given opportunity.
Patronage.
Yes, exactly. And the same things, musicians that played in the courts and, for the kings and all that. So they didn't struggle. There was no such thing as the starving artist. That didn't exist in the 1700s, the 1800s. I can't quote the exact numbers, but I had found a quote about Mozart. Mozart taught piano lessons, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that.
But he taught piano. That was a part of how he made a living. And we think Mozart is this great prodigy. And, well, of course he was. And he wrote such amazing music and such a huge catalog of material over so few years. But he also taught lessons a couple days a week. Now, he would teach, the countess or the duke or the baron, etc. He taught some very high-profile people. He also got paid a very healthy amount of money. If I remember correctly, it was around $200 an hour in today's dollars. Wow. If we do the currency exchange and all of that. And so he wasn't, in no part of his life was he giving anything away, and nor was even his teaching cheap. It wasn't affordable, and he never felt a need to make it that way for people. So I forgot your first question as I got off talking about that so much.
Why do musicians not get paid fairly? It is
Oh, yes.
And what is it about musicians, or why are we so uncomfortable talking about money?
I think that comes back to fear. I think people are afraid of offending someone. The problem is the cycle feeds itself. So the more musicians lower their price and the more they want to or give away for free, the more people expect that. And so if you come across, I come across a lot of piano teachers, for example, that charge like $30 an hour, for example. And okay, maybe you live in an area where that will provide a good living for you. And if you do, that's great. If you don't, we need to make some adjustments so that you can live, so that you can continue to teach, so you can continue to help others, serve others for many, many years, if that's what you'd like to do, and not have every day feel like it's such a burden financially. Yeah.
Sustainability.
Yeah.
That correlation with sustainability, that's the part people, musicians especially, are so late to recognize. Kind of sad. By the time they realize it, there are high chances that a certain sense of disillusionment has already set in. I also still don't get why conservatories or the colleges, who we kind of rely upon to make us quote-unquote professional musicians, don't even talk about this. I know some colleges are changing that, and they're including music business. Curriculums and so on, but it's still a far cry from a realistic education in how to make a living as a musician.
Also, the world has changed a lot, and a lot of faculty never had to think about these things themselves. I asked one of my professors a similar question, like, how did you start touring? How did you set your fees? I was looking for just answers when I was younger and trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. And he said, I didn't have to do any of that. I won a competition. I had an agent. And they did it. And, in some very elite circles that might still happen today. But for most of us, that is not the life that we live. We are our own representation. We're our own lawyers and attorneys, sometimes reading contracts, negotiating. So I think there's a lot of faculty that didn't have to live that life, where they didn't have to have those answers. And they were fine and very successful. And that has changed. And as more and more people that have had to figure out these answers on their own come into positions like that, we're going to see more and more education right from the get-go about how you need to think about what you're doing with music.
I'd like to add, the internet's flattened the world, so a lot of elite opportunities that were available due to a certain kind of restriction in certain geopolitical areas are just not the same anymore, for better or for worse. As a result of which the entire banking on being one of those chosen few to make it through those elite systems the way we could, 20 years back or even 30 years back. Some of my older mentors will tell me about how careers happened back in the day. They simply don't exist anymore. Like, the candidates have just gone, the metrics of the candidates are just like astronomical at this point. The whole system's changed. The doors are open to literally the entire planet. So it's not just a few people who might be interested in these elite opportunities. There's just too many people out there who are really good at what they do. And to bank on this one elite opportunity to be the thing, to bank on it. I'm not saying people should close out the opportunity, but to make that the game plan.
People do not get a lucky break. A lot of us, we see from the outside, oh, somebody rose to fame. Could, pick a name. It could be anybody. But what isn't usually talked about is all of the work that went in before that one moment. That one moment may have been life-changing, but that moment would have never happened without all of the work that came prior.
100%. And I can confirm this from some of my personal experiences too. When these opportunities knock at your door, you better be ready. Because if you're not, it could be the worst thing that ever happened to your career.
Yeah.
Gratitude from the bottom of my heart for listening to the very end. Please consider taking a minute to subscribe to our show so you know when the next episode is out. This is a labor of love, one I hope snowballs into one that's sustainable in its attempt to support independent thought and authentic relating. And having you as a regular member of our audience is what makes that a realistic prospect. Much love, and talk soon. Just another voice out there.